Hey guys, this is Eric Weingartner with Weingartner Racing. Today's video is over this small block Ford, yes I said Ford, AFR Enforcer Head. This one actually took place because of a customer. A customer had called me up and said, hey, have you ever done any video on the small block Ford AFR Enforcer Head? And I said, no, I hadn't. They just hadn't come in. And he said, would you mind if I ordered from you and you could do a video, because I can't find any information about these out there and I would like for you to do one. I said, absolutely. So all this video is because of one customer giving a chance to do this so I could record for you. I have a lot of different customers, but I don't always have the stuff that you're into. Obviously, most of my customers are Chevy based because that's the majority of what racing really is. So if there's a head you would like to see that I haven't done, I sell just about every head, I would recommend you call me up and order from me, and maybe we'll get a video and then I can share with more people. That's how this one's taking place. But anyway, let's get started. This is the AFR Enforcer Head. Now this is their cheaper line of heads. So they have a Renegade head that most of you are familiar with, which is full CNC ported, and it's a pretty good heads. Haven't done a whole lot of videos on those either because they haven't come in as much. So this one was meant to fit a more of a budget-friendly market. I think they actually have another head coming out, but AFR hasn't sent it to me to review. Should also point out they didn't send me this head either, obviously. So this is totally independent, had nothing, no one's asking me to glamorize anything. So everything you hear is exactly what I would say. But really economical head. I think the retail on these are about $12.50, something like that. They come with AFR's parts, and they're set up for a hydraulic roller, valve train up to 600 lift, and they have a 65cc chamber. Now I'm going to show you all this stuff, giving you my take on it as well. But that is the head, so I'm going to flip it over so you can get a better view of this head. But before I do, I forgot to mention also too, the AFR Enforcer heads are cast in China, and they're machined in China. Now that's a huge difference. And I know some of you who have watched my video said, I thought you said AFR has Chinese heads. No and yes. Let me explain. If you get some of their heads, say a small block Chevy line of their heads, some of their small block Chevy heads, they're actually cast in China. You're like, oh my gosh, that's horrible. They're just a blob when AFR gets them. In other words, they don't have any of these holes drilled, nothing, no guide holes, nothing. AFR literally takes that cast in China head and then machines it and then CNC ports it completely. And that's what they do on some of their heads. Not all. So for instance, I said small block Chevy, but some of the bigger small block Chevys are actually cast in America. You know, I would say, well, Chinese castings are horrible. If I put the American casting up next to the Chinese casting, I can tell you the Chinese casting is superior, and I hate to say it, but it's true. For instance, this is probably more than you want to know, the big block Chevy heads, they're having some issues, and if you've ordered a set of their AFR big block heads, they've been ordered for a very long time because of an American foundry issue, not an AFR issue. So point being is, some of their heads are cast in China, but not all. This one is unlike the Renegade. So the Renegade, I believe they were still they're working on having those cast in China, and then all the machining work would be done in America. Every little piece. The Enforcer heads are a different story. These ones are completely cast and machined in China. What I mean by that is the head first is cast and all these machine holes, the valve job, every single manufacturing part of the head is done overseas. The only thing that's done here in America is AFR puts in their own valve train components, their valves, pack springs, their whole setup, and they actually assemble them here. That's the difference. So on a Renegade head of line of the heads, they're doing every piece of the machine work. The only thing is that the head's cast there. The Enforcers, nothing's done here as far as machine work besides assembly. Now, AFR, I believe, still offers warranties on even their Enforcer heads, which they didn't cast or machine. So just keep that in mind. Their parts, by the way, the valves are the same ones you'll find in the Renegade. So those are fine. Great valves that they use, and their pack springs. I will say this is a hydraulic roller spring. They actually have two versions of their hydraulic roller springs. This is their cheaper one, which is good up to 600 lift. They've got a better one that's up to 650. So anyway, let me go ahead and flip the head around so I can show you some of the head and talk about it. Here's a chamber view of the head. Now I'm going to go ahead and tell you this, allegedly, this is a knockoff of the Dart head. So Dart actually made small block Ford heads, and they still do, but they have a hard time putting out anything really, to be honest with you now. But AFR didn't have this copy. This copy was done by someone else before AFR even looked overseas. So someone else had copied an AFR head and started casting it. So you wouldn't be uncommon to see other heads that look exactly like this one cast overseas, sold by a different company, not AFR. Just to give you, I don't want to give anybody other brand names, but there are several cast heads for small block Fords that look just like this head because they're the same head with some small changes. One of the changes, and this is going to be a big one for you guys, is AFR on all their valve train stuff that they use for a small block side is 8 millimeters. And what it means is the stem size. This is an 11/32 stem. And as you can tell, it's much bigger than the 8 millimeter. So AFR has everything in the small block world at 8 millimeter. Their LSs, small block Chevys, and small block Ford. So because of that, since they have all their valve train parts that they put in there to keep things more universal, the only thing that's different from these heads that you might get from AFR versus ones you would get from some other company that look exactly alike is AFR actually has, when they're manufactured over in China, have them install guides for an 8 millimeter valve. That is unique to them, for sure. Because every other one you see that looks like this might be exactly looking like this. The valve job might even be very similar. It will have 11/32 stems, not 8 millimeter. Anyway, the head itself looks really, really nice. I mean, these are beautiful chambers. They're modeled after Dart, allegedly. They look really nice. They're very good job here. I'm gonna go through some of the stuff that I like and don't like. This is the valve job. Being that it was done overseas, it's really just 3 angles. You got your top cut, that's your seat, and that's your bottom cut. These cuts here, or my guess was to quickly get rid of the casting that was left after it was poured. This does not help flow, and it's not good to do, and there it is. So if you're asking how could you improve them, you could blend this. And I've got good news for you, because I called the customer up. I said, you know, if I redo this valve job and just blend this, I think it's really gonna improve it. And he said, go for it. So you're gonna get a follow-up video later on about me doing that. And I do think you guys could do that stuff at home. So the valve job itself, 3 angles, not bad. That ridge isn't helping flow, but neither is, camera focus, right there. This is where the top cut comes in and it hits this ridge. That does not help flow. And you can see the exhaust ones quite a bit. That's, when I go blending, that's gonna be gone, but that is not helping flow at all. It just isn't. So getting rid of that all would really help. Downside for this head, going to tell you, is if you look at the seat, you can see where the seat is. The seat itself is just barely bigger than the 202 valve that's in it. So if you're wanting to put a bigger valve like a 208 valve, it ain't gonna happen. So if you're a machinist and you're watching this, it can't happen. You'll have to change the seat. So put a large oversized seat in here before you could do that, which would be really a waste of money. You spend more on that labor than you would for the head. So can't do it, stuck with 202. Exhaust side's 1/600. And let me see if I can't get the, there we go. Maybe not, stuck on something, there we go. This is not helping exhaust flow at all either. So you got, this is not a radius valve job really. Usually we put radiuses on the exhaust because it helps flow. You can see a pretty good ridge here. That's definitely not helping exhaust flow, and neither is that. However, I know you're asking yourself, well, wait a minute, how good is the valve job though? Are they sealed up? They do seal up. I did vacuum test this whole head and it does seal up. So the function of a valve job, the main function really is to make sure that the valve actually seals. So when it presses down on the seat, it doesn't leak air, and they do. So that part's fine. So even though the valve job is done overseas, they do function as they're supposed to in sealing up the air. They just don't help airflow. I took some measurements of the throat, and it comes in at 89.7%, so almost 90%. The bowl will come in at 98%, so it's got good ratios there. Not bad at all. So anyway, let me flip around so I can show you the other view from the intake side and get on with it. Here's our intake ports from this side, so you can see the short side. They don't really look that bad. The casting actually looks pretty smooth. Very good job there. Nice and consistent. Good, very good, to be honest with you. The push rod pinch measures are really relatively small. Now remember, these are 185 cc heads, but you really can't measure volume in the head that way. It's better to use cross sections. And the cross section, the minimum is 1.98, which is really small. Perfect though for a smaller cubic inch engine, like say a 302, 347 stuff that you're gonna use on the street, perfect. If you were trying to really race it, spin some high RPM stuff, you should pump out the grinder because you're gonna need some more area for sure. Looking up top though, you can see a couple of things that AFR does it well, and not a lot of companies do this. This is a spring cup. It actually holds the spring in place. That's good. And then they've got quality seals on it as well. Good job there. Now I'm gonna show you the exhaust ports, and then I'll put it on the flow bench and see how well it actually does. Here's the exhaust side of things, and they look pretty good, and they've got multiple patterns for different headers. I know Ford, you've got quite a bit of different patterns for your stuff. For instance, I think you've got a standard one, then you've got an end pattern, then Dart actually has like a 3-inch centers, and I think there's different ones for 2 7/8. It feels like you've got more than any other manufacturer as far as exhaust bolt patterns. So there's multiple here, but it looks like the exhaust ports are raised up a little bit, much like the Dart that it allegedly was patterned after. And they should do relatively well. The casting looks really smooth. The only thing is that ridge that's down there is probably, let me get the light here so you can see it. Let me just put it right in front of the camera this time. That ridge is probably gonna hurt flow. So, but anyway, doesn't really matter. Let's go ahead and get it on the flow bench and see what it does. I'm gonna flow on a 4030 bore because that's what the customer's on. And I imagine most of you are probably on about the same size bore. I will not flow with an exhaust pipe because I think it cheats up the numbers. So anyway, let me get on the flow bench and I'll share those results. All right, so here's the head. It's on the flow bench. I flowed it. I want to let you know, 4030 bore, just to make sure everything's all on the up and up. It's a clay entry. You do have to use a clay entry whenever you flow a set of heads. You just have to. Some kind of radius entry. I shouldn't say it's clay. Unfortunately, I don't have like a plastic one for a Ford head. I do for plenty for Chevys. So on the Ford stuff, I just use clay. It's nice entry, rounded and everything. The exhaust, I do have a spark plug in there. That is a projected tip. Non-projected tip might flow a little bit better, but most of you guys that are running this head probably will run a projected tip. So there it is. Let's look at the flow numbers now. Here are the flow numbers, and I went all the way to 9. As far as that's when the valve retainer hit the guide. So clearly you're probably not gonna go that far, which is fine. So we look at it. The numbers I like most are 4, 6, and peak. If we look at 4, 227, that's kind of low. That's mostly because of that little ridge that's in there. I have a feeling once the valve job gets redone and stuff, that number's gonna come up a little bit. The peak numbers at 2 or 600 is 263, and it goes up to 269 at 7, but it's about that range. That's not bad. It's actually really good flow for the size that it is. So not bad at all. Really good flow numbers for that. Would like to have seen the 400 number be a bit better though. And I think with some minor work, that number should come up. I bet you we're gonna get into the 230s range, which still is not stellar, but better than 220s. The exhaust flow, it's not quite as good. I mean, if I was really impressed when I was flowing it because I got here at 3 as a 151. I figured, oh, we're gonna be in the 180s at 4, which would be outstanding. And it just hit 175, but if you notice this is not ever what I wanna see. It backs up and flow as the valve opens. Now, sometimes that can happen on the exhaust, on the intake, but it's a horrible idea on the exhaust. So, not so good there. But in all fairness, Fords aren't the best on the exhaust side, even though this is raised up. It's just kind of their design. If you raise it up more, it would be better. So that's part of their problem. And I'll say, this head isn't near as raised up as some of the other ones that you might see. So yes, it's raised up far more than a stock one, but there's others that are raised up even more. And they're also wider because of your bolt patterns. That's also limiting your size on the exit, which hurts flow. So if you just did like this pattern, it could be bigger here. But we don't necessarily shooting for flow. We're shooting for what we need size-wise to match the RPM and the engine size that you're running. So anyway, I just don't like to see it ever back up. So if it done 171 and carried it, I'd be a lot happier than it backing up to 163. So the valve job is going to fix some of this, but I have a feeling it's still going to keep continuing on. This would take some port work to fix. Now, before I leave you today, I know many of you are asking yourselves, why in the world would AFR sell an imitation of a dart head, allegedly? Well, don't feel bad. They just probably got to the foundry or whoever said, you want to sell these heads? And they were probably sure. But don't feel bad because, you know what? What is this? Oh, this is a Chinese small block Ford 185 head. I've showed this before in some videos. This is an AFR head. So someone has copied the AFR 185 head, their CNC ported one. That's this head. That's right. So some other company is selling the knockoff of the AFR, while the AFR is allegedly selling the knockoff of the dart head. And I know you're thinking, why doesn't AFR just sell the knockoff of their own head? That's a great question. I don't have a great answer. I just don't. It is kind of funny when you think about it, but yeah, that's it. And I know you're like, well, wait a minute. Can you tell me how much this head flows, this one? I actually already recorded it, and I gave it a chance for people to vote which one they'd rather see, the Mopar or the Ford, and the Mopar guys are turned out to be more fanatical. I've already recorded it, and eventually this will get out. I just haven't yet. But this whole video is about the Enforcer head. It is very good, so if you get it, you did well. So anyway, thanks for watching this video. Remember, I'm no Superman, and you guys take care.